Tech Rainmakers episode with Brandon Jones, CEO of Triad. Triad is the leading provider of education, community, and career resources for behavioral and mental health professionals. Before this, Brandon was with Kaplan Test Prep for the longest time, where he helped set up the strategy and he led through digital transformation as president of its largest operating unit. Throughout his tenure at Kaplan, he worked closely with its divisional shared services team, including the engineering team, to develop a market-leading product and the M&A team to spearhead acquisition and divestment efforts. So over to you, Brandon, to tell us more about your journey with Kaplan and now with Triad.
Great, thanks, Anupam. I'm excited to be here. Appreciate you having me, and excited to share some experiences and learnings that I've had over my 20-plus year career. First, briefly about me personally. So as you mentioned, my name is Brandon Jones. I'm the CEO here at Triad. I live in New York City in Manhattan with my wife and 7-year-old daughter. So we've been here for, I guess my 7-year-old daughter's only been here for 7 years, but we've been here for 10 plus years. We really feel like native New Yorkers here at this point. But professionally, you mentioned I have sort of worked under two banners, starting at Kaplan Test Prep. And sort of a interesting, at least to me, story about that. When I graduated college, both my parents were high school English teachers, and I thought I might become a high school English teacher. So I sought out the lowest commitment, shortest term way possible to figure out if I was any good at teaching and if I liked it. And so I found Kaplan Test Prep to be an SAT instructor. And ultimately, over the course of 19 plus years, it turns out it wasn't so low commitment, but it was a great experience. I held a number of roles in different functional areas at Kaplan, including, as you mentioned, leading the largest operating unit as the president of that unit for the last 5 years. And that was the business that I think many people think about when they think about Kaplan Test Prep. It's the business, what we called admissions, that gets you into college, law school, grad school, med school, et cetera. In 2019, I switched banners. I came from Kaplan to Triad, where I'm now the CEO. And it's been a great next step in my professional journey. The behavioral mental health space, which you talked about in terms of what Triad does, is really important to me personally. It's been really rewarding professionally, and I'm enjoying the experience leading this company. One note that I didn't mention is I don't have a formal background, a formal education in technology. I don't have an engineering background. I don't have a CS degree. So I've had to sort of learn on the job, as it were. As a business leader, I've had to learn technology, and I think we'll talk about that a little bit throughout the conversation today.
Wow, that's really interesting. And yes, we would like to hear more about how you kind of, learned on the job, because technology somehow seems like, you start with it and then you are with it throughout. So interesting. So how has your role or the whole technology domain differed at Kaplan and Triad, or is it almost the same? And then tell us more about the some themes that have run through, your experience of 22 years through different roles and two different organizations.
Yeah, good questions. I'll start with the first. Triad and Kaplan are more similar than not. So I would characterize Triad essentially as the Kaplan of the space that we're in, behavioral mental health professional education. And both are ed tech companies. Kaplan wasn't an ed tech company in its history, and nor was it, frankly, when I started there back in the year 2000. So I can remember that time. We had at that point 160 centers, physical, bricks and mortar locations where we housed all of the content that students would prepare with. So if you were studying for the MCAT, the test to get into medical school here in the United States, you would come into our centers, you would check out material to use in those centers. We talked about, we called it plasticizing the pages. You would take a blue wet erase marker and mark up your practice in there. It was a very different time. I remember, I had my Palm Pilots and then my BlackBerry, and so the technology that we use have changed. And I think the experience that I went through and helped lead at Kaplan really was to transform a venerable bricks and mortar business into a digital business. And I think we'll talk about digital transformation later in this conversation as well. But that's been a big learning for me. That was an exciting period of transformation. And again, I think Triad is more similar to Kaplan than not. It's education technology, so our educational materials are delivered through an LMS. We've got front-end e-commerce solution that provides the purchasing experience, and those are pretty similar. In terms of some themes that I've learned along the way, I would say the best product usually wins. So the best brand or the best marketing can sometimes prop up a not best product, but not for long. The market votes with its wallet ultimately in this space, and you need to have the best product. And in terms of product, as another theme, there isn't a bright line in my experience, at least in ed tech, between product and engineering. The tech usually is the product, and that doesn't necessarily mean data architecture, but in terms of the UX and the UI, certainly that is the case. That if customers aren't able to experience your technology in a way that is easy and rewarding for them, you're not going to be in business for long. So that's something. Another note on that, sort of in that vein, with any technology-based product, you're not just competing with other solutions, replacement solutions in your market. You're competing with essentially all experiences that customers have, right? So using their iPhone, the apps on it, they're shopping on Amazon. Those are the competitive experiences that define really all markets. And most tech just works, right? That's the thing. Most people aren't thinking about. Most consumers aren't thinking about the underlying technology and the products that they use. And that's important to keep in mind when you're building anything for any solution. That is a customer's typical experience. They're using every day, hours and hours of the day, things that just work. So your tech needs to work too. Just a couple more thoughts here. I found that how you build, what you build is almost as important as what you build. Organizational alignment is really critical. It's has not always been the case. I mean, more often than not, in my experience, it has. But there have been times when organizations I've been part of have felt out of alignment, and that really introduces a lot of organizational waste and time loss. So that's something that's really important. The people say culture eats everything, and I think that's right. Culture, I would note, are not just words on a wall, but the way that the day-to-day work works, how the team works together. And last thought, maybe in terms of themes, at the end of the day, if you have a product that is built by people and consumed by people, your product and your company is defined ultimately by the people on both sides, the people who build things, the people who sell those things, the people who buy those things. And really being connected, and then we'll talk about customers here in a bit, but really being connected with your customers and really prioritizing the team that you have around you, both of those are critical.
So I'm hearing a lot of things here, and I would, because there would be some leaders listening to this or future leaders listening to this. So how have you over the years managed these things? Because you are talking about keeping your team in sync, right? There has to be a business alignment, right? From the marketing side, the business side, to the tech side. And you're also talking about keeping the people connected, the people who are making it and the people who are using it, and also kind of cutting through all the noise that is tech space today, right? It wasn't so probably, even 10 years back, it was not so. So how have you managed to do that over the last 10, 15 years?
Yeah, so a couple things I would note. So one is having really clearly articulated. At Triad, we use a framework of purpose, mission, and strategy statements. So the purpose is why you exist. The mission is who you serve, and the strategy is how you do it. That's not a trivial exercise. Is really authoring that in a way that captures the spirit of the organization and focuses the energy of the organization. I spent, when I got here in August 2019, I spent basically the first quarter in my seat as CEO talking to every employee. So I did IDIs, in-depth interviews with every employee, asking them the same sets of questions, speaking with every member of the board. And the output of that process was a mission, purpose, mission strategy statement, that has been something that's been really galvanizing for the organization. So that's one part. Again, I mentioned earlier, it can't just be words on a wall. It has to be how the organization actually works. And the other thing I would say is in terms of the actual work, I'm a big fan of OKRs. I'm sure that most listeners here are familiar with that, but if you're not, there's a good book by John Doerr that you can check out, Measure What Matters. And I've found at both Kaplan and Triad that the OKR, objectives and key results framework, is one that makes the work more actionable, measurable, and transparent. So at Triad, we use a shared document, Google Doc, Google Sheet, that lists all of the work that the entire organization is doing. And so anyone from any functional group can click into any of the tabs and see what it is that their colleagues are doing. And we have standing bi-weekly meetings on every one of the major quarterly themes that are cross-functional. And so, there's never a time when people are, unaware of what their colleagues are doing. And I think that helps with the teaming part of it. And last thing, finally, I said maybe two things. Here's a third bonus thing. The quality of the people really matters. I think this has been said by others, but the difference between, an A+ player and a B player cannot be the 10xing of your business, could be the 100xing of your business. So, I would really encourage leaders and future leaders to interrogate their team and see, where there are places where having, even someone more talented would really accelerate things. And I've tried to do that throughout my career.
Oh, those are some very, very, interesting insights, because it does happen that these things, mission and purpose, and they become more writings on the wall, and they're also seen a lot of times as just words and not a tool to be used. And yes, KRs and objectives, yes, definitely, those make a lot of difference. So thanks for sharing that with us. So now let's come back to the customer, and how has so what have been some big learnings over the years, or how has your approach kind of been molded by customer experience, a focus on customer experience and customer expectations?
Yeah, thanks for getting us back to customers. That's central. You'll hear me say this to really any company's focus should be. And I touched on this earlier, but customer expectations are not only set by the experience with your product or replacement products in the market, but both with all products. And I think that's an important consideration just to keep in mind. And since customers, I mentioned they vote with their wallets, since they ultimately will determine a company's success, the customer needs to be central to the product development process. A thing that I've really grappled with in my career is, how do you know what customers want? So I think we've all heard the adages, whether it's the Steve Jobs quote about, it's hard to design products based on focus groups. People won't know what they want until you show it to them. They never would have asked me to build an iPhone. Or the Henry Ford quote about, people wouldn't have wanted a car, they would have wanted a faster horse and buggy. In addition to that, what customers say they will do, in my experience, is not a great predictor of what they actually will do. So I've really tried to focus our efforts, our customer-centric efforts, around customer behavior. Now, we do IDIs, in-depth interviews regularly. I think that there's value to be extracted in, showing whether it's wireframes or clickable prototypes or anything in the product development process. It's to showing them and seeing, their flash reaction to it. I've also found the most value in measuring their behavior, as I mentioned. So we do a lot of A/B testing, using tools like Optimize or Optimizely. We do fake door testing when we're rolling out new products, even before we have them, to see what click behavior is. I would say clicks are more valuable than what survey responses. So that has been one of my takeaways. And I think even selling MVPs, right, it needs to be viable, right? You can't have an MP that isn't V. But if you can sell something before you fully develop it, even the best indicator of purchase intent is purchase behavior. So there have been times in my career, and I'm coming to you with 22 years of experience. I have plenty of battle scars. There have been times when we've built something that was very popular in surveying to customers and just wasn't commercially viable because people didn't ultimately buy it. So I think that's a really important thing. And then that's all in sort of the pre-launch, product development process. A/B testing can be used sort of anywhere in the process, but once you have a shippable product, it's really important to measure customer sentiment. We use NPS, and it's also important, I think, to get leaders connected to that directly. So, I'm not wearing this as a badge of honor, but just as something that is important to me personally. I read every NPS verbatim that comes in every month at Triad. It's a good way to stay connected to what your actual customers are saying about your actual product. And I'd recommend, leaders and other future leaders consider having that channel directly into them to hear the voice of the customer. And finally, you need to have the right relationship with your customers. I know when I got to Triad, there was, on day one, the person who was running our customer service group, who is no longer running our customer service group. The first two stories he told me were about how he had beaten customers at the Better Business Bureau in the US. You can report to the BBB if there's an issue you've had as a customer. And he was showing sort of like claiming victory over customers, and it's just the wrong kind of sentiment. And so we have really shifted our relationship with customers at Triad, including to reach out to customers before they have any issues or concerns. And we do white glove outreach post-purchase just to check in. We leave a lot of voicemails, but even just that check-in, I think, is really meaningful. So, keep the customer's voice present and make sure you have the right relationship with them.
Wow. So that was interesting hearing about the person who's no longer there in that role. So as a leader, you do come across people who are very, very good technologically, but probably not connected to the customer. So, you have built that in yourself over the years, but somebody who's starting now or has recently started a few years back, how do they, amazing technical understanding, amazing technical abilities, but not enough understanding of the market. How do they go about building this understanding of the customer? What would you recommend to them?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think I'll sort of trade on something I already said here, which is you just have to get a channel of the customer voice into you somehow. And that's whether you're a junior software engineer, whether you are a QA tester, whether you're wherever you are in your experience, I would strongly recommend that you find some way to get plugged into the customer experience. You're not building a product to be used in a lab, by and large, right? You're building a product to be used out in the world. And if you aren't getting feedback from customers, it's really hard to make that best product to build the best experience for them. And I would say just talk to other people in the organization who have access to those data. I mean, most organizations don't, put those data, don't imprison those data. Those data should be accessible to most people. Just because you don't see it doesn't mean you can't see it. So I would recommend that. And really, I talk about this in the training of new people at Triad. And this is a sort of industry specific framework, but I talk about needing to learn the licensure process, needing to learn our product, and needing to learn the customers. And on that third part, I have all new people who work at Triads talk to people who are in this space, right? Talk to, other subject matter experts, talk to people who have been customers themselves. And it doesn't matter what your role is. You could be on the customer service team, you could be an engineer, you could be in sales. You have to be connected to the customer.
Wow. That last part I really like, that, during training, having them actually interact with the customer. So does the responsibility of ensuring that the team kind of understand the customer expectation, not just as a point on a slide, but more than that, what they are actually experiencing, do you feel a responsibility of that also lies on the leader to some extent, because you have taken that up, right? uh, would you say if there is a leader, they have to take that on, that responsibility for their people to kind of.
Yeah, I would say yes. And I would say that I've heard earlier in my career a number of times, that no one is going to care as much about your career as you do. And that's not meant to be like a weaponized comment. That is a statement of fact. And so I would say if you are working in an organization that doesn't have leaders who do, who prioritize customer voice and who prioritize measuring customer sentiment, start doing it yourself. I don't think you need to be the leader. I think you're right that leaders have a responsibility, but if you're in an organization where they're not taking that responsibility, there is more you can do yourself. So I think that's important to keep in mind. It's can start really anywhere in an organization, including with you.
Wow. Wow. That's an interesting insight. So coming back to technology, so digital transformation, everybody talks about it and everybody has their own understanding about it. What do you see, how, in your domain, in your area, how is this going to kind of pan out in the coming years, and how important is customer experience? I can hear that you believe that that's the most important thing. But as technology takes over more and more, how important, or will it become more important, or will its importance lessen? How do you view it in the coming years?
Yeah, to the last part of that question, I don't think that technology in any way lessens the customer experience. It changes the customer experience, but it just means there's a new customer experience that's technology driven. So I think that having a sort of customer first perspective should be true no matter what it is that you're building or how that you're building, whether you're in a services industry or solutions or an as a service industry. You have, presumably, if you're commercializing what you're doing, you have some kind of sellable something. And that means you have some kind of customer for that something. And so, whatever the solutions are, I think that doesn't change the focus on customers. In terms of the, digital transformation, I will note, while the world definitely is different than when I mentioned, plasticized study sheets and Palm Pilots from the start of my career, digital transformation has not met all parts of all markets equally. So there are still plenty of problems looking for technical solutions. I feel like I have to say, beware of solutions looking for problems. Those are rarely the best ways to approach things. But a couple of examples from my space, specifically in the behavioral mental health market in the US. One is therapists are spending about 40% of their time on non-client facing activity. So that's largely completing paperwork for fee-for-service or other reimbursement, auditable work. That's got to change. At least in the US, there is a big gap between demand for therapy and supply of therapists. So one way to solve that is to make more therapists, but another way, a faster way, I would argue, to solve that is to make the therapists more client-facing in their time, right? If you can reduce that number, I'm going to do some fast math here. If you can reduce that 40% to 20%, you're increasing capacity essentially by 25%, right? So, I think that is a place that is shouting out for a solution, and Triad and a number of our partners are working on that right now. Another is, with the increase of teletherapy, there are more people who are looking to get licensed in more states, but it is very Byzantine, the process. So there are 50 states plus the District of Columbia. Again, this is a US specific comment, but there are 50 different regulations for each licensure. And there's nothing that sort of provides a layer on top of that to make it easy for therapists to navigate that. And that's something that we are also actively working on. We have a solution shipping in Q2. So, there are, just again, by the way of examples, there are a number of those that haven't been solved. And that's just from our space. I'll give one other example that I think is maybe gets into some themes of what's coming up. So in K-12 in the United States, the average K-12 school district with more than 1,000 students is currently using 1,400 different ed tech products, which I think is just, it's mind-blowing. That's more than one ed tech solution per student, which is wild. And that's been accelerated tremendously through COVID period with more, at home and hybrid settings. That 1,400 number was 500 in 2019, 900 in 2020, and the proliferation has just been incredible. So, that comes from a virtuous place. It's democratization of the classroom, letting teachers drive the decisions about what they use, but the result is paralyzing for districts and buildings and teachers and parents and students. There's no real way to measure efficacy when you're using 1,400 different solutions. Just the maintenance of those products becomes difficult. So, I think as an example, a big winner in this space will likely be solutions that provide aggregation of different ed tech solutions, and interoperability are things that are going to become increasingly critical in this space. So there's more transformation to be done. So if any listeners to this session are thinking about digital transformation, come on in, the water is warm. There are lots of things to be done, and new solutions create new problems as well, as I mentioned on that K-12 example.
Yeah, that's scary actually, 1,400 for 1,000 big crowd. It's scary as a parent, and it's scary as someone who's a learner. I mean, how do you even manage? How do you even know which one is good and which is not? And awesome. So these were all advice for others, but what would you have told a younger you, as we're coming to the close of this session? That's one thing I would really like to know.
Yeah, well, one thing I did want to mention, I will answer that question. One thing I did want to mention is some other emerging themes that I see in this space. And maybe I can say I would have told a younger me to stay connected to what's coming up next. But I didn't mention this at the top. I also was a podcast host for 3 years, co-host a show called Trending in Education, where we covered, you might be surprised by this given the title, but trends in education. And so I did a lot through that podcast. I did a lot of sort of looking out, beyond the horizon of what's coming up. So I'll just, if you don't mind, I will cite a couple things that I think should be interesting. Some technology trends I think worth keeping an eye on. One is simulations. So for high cost, high stakes training. This has been used for decades in pilot training, for example, and used for a decade plus in medical education. But really anywhere there is a repeatable task that is high stakes, there is and complex. There are simulation opportunities. And so I think even in our space in behavioral mental health education, you've got clients presenting to their therapist, and one would want in her training a therapist to have experienced that before she's working with live patients. So that's one is on sim. I think the space of VR, AR, and MR are still emerging and still hardware dependent, still pre-scale, but they're increasingly becoming available and affordable. I expect that in the first places to adopt this really will be in gaming and in what I call social commercial spaces, like what Meta is trying to do. But I think education should be a fast follower there. So keep an eye on that. And then I think also decentralized data solutions, so blockchain solutions. Obviously the early applications in crypto and other financial services, but any time there's an opportunity to disintermediate some intermediary or create an extra intermediary where one doesn't exist, I think is interesting. So, I think I would love to see educational records, sort of blockchain stored educational records that are distinct from the schools that house them, and a la what medical records are and will be. I look forward to a time where all of the work that you do sort of accumulates in one decentralized, generally agreed upon place. So, and then I would also say for people who are interested in this, two places that I found are regular sources of inspiration are the Gartner Hype Cycle and Holon IQ. If people are, you don't have to be a futurist to live in the future, I will tell you, because we all will eventually. So I think it's worthwhile keeping your eyes on that. That was sort of tangential to the question that you asked, which I will also answer about, what I would tell a younger me. First is that business leaders today in 2022, and this has been true for a decade plus, can't afford to be non-technical. That doesn't mean that every single person needs a CS degree or an engineering background, but if tech is your product, I don't think you can be an effective leader if you don't understand the technology. And I would tell a younger me that early in my career, I mentioned I started at Kaplan as an instructor. I then led, teams of academics. And when I was in my first general management role, leading an engineering team, I said, just sort of in the spirit of transparency here, I would say to myself and to others, that's not my area of expertise in a way. And I intended it to be enabling to those experts who we did have. I wanted to acknowledge their expertise in an area that I didn't have. But I found ultimately it was sort of giving myself a pass on not rolling up my sleeves and really learning. Now, that doesn't mean I need to lay a bunch of code, but I do need to understand data architecture and how the technology is actually built, what solutions we're using, what programming languages we're working in. Like that is actually important for me as a business leader. And I wish I had known that as a younger me, but I've learned that lesson on the job. Just a couple other quick things I would say to older me saying to younger me, error-free product is not the goal. Having a team and a system that resolves products quickly is. So I became a big fan of MTTR, mean time to recovery, as a measure of record in terms of the health of a team, rather than the number of bugs, for example. If you never ship something with bugs, you're probably not shipping fast enough. So that was an important learning. I think flexibility and optionality in planning and budgeting is critical. The world moves so fast. Like the quarter or the year is not the atomic unit of how things work. I think that you need to have flexibility there. Like you will learn things today that should impact your business decisions today, frankly. We operate an agile shop, and so that's built into our product development process, but it's not always aligned with your planning or budgeting cycles. I will say I don't think I've ever gotten to year 3 in a year 3 plan. So, I think that's just underscores how much, the sort of VUCA nature of the world here, that we just don't know what's coming next. And organizations that are most resilient are going to be ones that are, standing close to the exits there. 2 last things I would say, don't mistake good stories for good business. So sometimes I think a trap that people fall into is the person who tells the story the best seems to be the person who gets, whether it's the most resourcing or the most advocacy. Storytelling is important, and I'm not saying that, I'm not discrediting that, but really get into the underlying fundamentals. Just because it's a good story doesn't mean it's good business. And finally, and I would say this to all, not just younger me, but to all listeners out there, I like the framework of do less, get more done. So you can't, especially as an emerging leader, you can't just trade on the work that you've done. If you have a certain skill set that has made you successful in a given job, it's probably not the skill set that's going to make you successful in your next job. So finding people who you can share work with, responsibility with, where you can trust your colleagues and not just be present in every decision, it is really important. And so, and plus there's a lot of non-work related stuff to do out there. There's, I like to say, have fun and be awesome. And there's a lot of fun outside of work. So make sure you got some time to do that too.
Wow. Wow. We can actually make posters of these and put them all around in the organization. Amazing, amazing stuff. I just have one question. Listening to you, I was just thinking that you have been in EdTech domain, and you have lived through the transformation. There is one end of that domain which is not technical and which is trying to become technical but still resists, which is the actual facilitation team, right? So how critical is for them, or how difficult is it going to become for them to kind of keep up with the technology, because it is a little bit of scary space for them, and you have been on both the ends, creating that transformation and starting, you're starting as a facilitator. So what would you say to a facilitator to survive in this domain, or how tough is it going to be for them in the coming
Yeah, I mean, I would say that there are macro trends it is very hard to swim against those currents. So, we think about technology, whether it's in the classroom or how we're delivering this conversation today, via Zoom. If you're someone who is a technical rejecter, you just won't have the opportunity to participate in the way that education is being delivered today. So, I will give an example from that as a personal one, which is I have parents who are not surprisingly older than me, and they're in their mid 70s, and I tell them to, I'm a big believer in growth mindset. So Carol Dweck is one of my personal heroes. And so I think it is believing that you can't do something differently is usually the biggest impediment to doing something differently. And so I have encouraged, again, to make it personal, my mom and my dad to believe that they can, and to embrace new technologies that are going to make their lives easier. Now, I will tell you, I wish that I hadn't convinced my mom that she could text as often as she does. But there are new technologies that for facilitators, for educators, are just going to make their lives and their students' lives and the learning better. And if you aren't adopting it, I think you will find others who do, who replace you. So again, that's not meant to be, it's meant to be an uplifting angle, because I believe, most people can do most things. But it's more a mindset shift, I think, than really anything.
Wow. Thanks for that. Is there anything else, Brandon, you would like to add before we close this session?
I don't think so. I think this has been a great conversation. Thank you for inviting me to participate. I look forward to seeing what people who are listening to this conversation today do out in the world. I mean, I think that's one of the things that is so exciting to operate today, is that the rules of engagement have changed, and the underlying solutions really can enable new problems to be solved in new ways. So I'm excited to see what people do with this conversation and do out in the world.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for your time, Brandon. It was really insightful and interesting conversation. So for our viewers who are watching this, if you have any questions for Brandon, please leave them in the comments, and we'll get back to Brandon with those. And do also let us know what more do you want us to talk about in our upcoming webinars. Thank you, and keep tuned in.